Why do video games exist? Seriously, what are they for? A military experiment privatized into the most successful entertainment industry in modern history? The next stage in human development? A way for me to finally meet the girl of my dreams? Or something much more? Video games have played a huge role in my life from childhood on, but understanding their significance in a larger context has always been very difficult for me. I was born into a world that has always known video games. In 1998, 2 years before the turn of the century, the effect that video games would have upon the modern Western world was already in full effect. Now I stand upon the precipice of one of the greatest catastrophes ever universally experienced by any collective population at one time, watching decaying institutions give out left and right in the USA. I figured I'd best spend my time experiencing two of the most important video games of this generation, seeing that the medium is so important to me. I started with Grand Theft Auto V, Rockstar's seminal masterpiece. I needed to know what was up with the default game that so many people across the country either owned a copy of or had downloaded onto their systems. I actually hadn't played much Grand Theft Auto V before I purchased the game back in November. I of course have watched a fair amount of it being played and hadn't escaped its influence over the years. I mean, when I say it feels like this game is the default game installed on people's consoles, when I meet someone who hasn't played their fair share of GTA, I'm quite surprised. Moving on to the game's story, I already knew who Michael, Trevor, and Franklin were just by cultural osmosis, but I was curious to see what was really up with GTA 5, what the intricacies of its story held. But before I go on, I must note that plenty of people who play GTA nowadays do so for the excitement of the online mode alone, which I basically skipped. I wanted to know what this game meant to people in terms of its base story, what it meant to people when it came out originally, for those 16.7% of people who've completed the final mission, at least according to PlayStation's trophy tracking system. When I first got the game, however, it was a joy to just fuck around once I'd been given free rein to explore the city. I was in my last days of college, and they were spent gleefully exploring the immense and alive Los Santos. I was actually born in Los Angeles, and I spent some time finding a few landmarks that I remembered from my childhood. I definitely spent more than one drunk night musing to my friends about Echo Park in LA County, which I remembered vividly. I found this vista in the game and visited it many times. In fact, me and my friends had a blast just taking turns with the game, passing the controller as each person died, having wreaked as much havoc as we could upon the poor citizens of Los Santos. It was fun to explore the city in this way. We figured out how to hijack a plane without any guns. I rode the subway for a while once, for no reason, and we even went to the movie theater and watched the in-game film, which went on for way longer than any of us expected. It quickly became clear to me that this game's scale in terms of content was totally massive. It meant a lot for me to actually go back to the East Coast virtually. I was supposed to visit LA as a sort of graduation gift in May, but that never really came to pass thanks to COVID. Instead, when I came back to live with my mom, I figured I'd work to finally see the credits in this game, to occupy Los Angeles virtually. I made my way through the missions, appreciating the grand cinematic moments and enjoying the guided tour of the various vistas in the city. The fact that a game which has so many cooks in the kitchen can deliver even a coherent message of any kind to me is hugely surprising, and the sheer detail one can observe in the world is totally staggering. It was admittedly an effective replacement for reality in the time in which I made my way through the story. What impresses me the most about Grand Theft Auto V, though, is the depth of the world that Rockstar has created really allows for such an immersive escapism. Los Santos feels alive, whether you've only beaten enough missions to just explore the city, or you've beaten the game. The game just feels like another world. There are so many features and minigames that even I skipped in my 30 plus hours it took me to get to the credits. Slowly the question creeped into my head as I explored the city: what can't I do? Well, there's plenty of limitations. Sure, not every building is enterable, and NPCs don't have homes or lives that they lead, and the world really still only gives off, of course, an illusion of life. But the level to which they've achieved is a real testament to the technology of this generation. This game in of itself feels like an institution in this industry now, thanks to how profitable it is. So, with the freewheeling open world of Grand Theft Auto under my belt, I figured it'd be worthwhile to experience arguably the most celebrated game on the Switch up to this point, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I actually had put about 25 hours into Breath of the Wild when the Switch first came out. I traded the game for Splatoon 2 with a friend because Splatoon 2 was my launch game of choice, and we just wanted to switch to see what each game was like. In that short time, the game had made a huge impression on me. Once I started playing it, I wanted nothing else but to continue playing. It had completely captured my imagination. However, I had to go and return to college, of course, and thus I put the game down in summer 2017, not picking it back up until earlier this month. What had actually spurred my desire to play Breath of the Wild was a random hike I went on by myself. I had been exploring various local trails in my hometown. These experiences alone have been quite profound, but one of these outings I found myself feeling particularly free and happy. It strangely made me recall playing Zelda for the Breath of the Wild specifically for the first time. This sensation of freedom and, dare I say, adventure I was learning in real life brought me to thoughts of Breath of the Wild. So, coming home from this hike, I picked up the game and started it that same night. I was delighted to find that it totally lived up to the little adventurous fantasies I was having. Much has been said about Breath of the Wild in the 3 short years since its release, but as a non-Zelda fan, I have to admit that the game fulfills some childlike fantasy of great adventure that nothing else at this point has really done the same. I would have loved to have been an anonymous traveler in this world rather than the chosen one hero. My ideal alternate life in Hyrule would be that of a wandering traveler who slowly builds up the nerve to take on Calamity Ganon after a couple months of wandering in a desolate land. Hyrule in this game feels alive in a way that has been widely discussed. So many game systems interlock to create a world that to me gets even closer than Grand Theft Auto of creating this vivid illusion of a truly living, breathing world on the other side of my screen. Still, I completed my hero's quest like any other diligent warrior wanting to see the end of the game. I made my way across the lands, visiting a couple of colorful and diverse kingdoms, and assisting in their struggle before making my way to Hyrule Castle. From beginning to end, the game enraptured me. I must admit, I'm not a huge Zelda fan. I played Ocarina of Time out of curiosity to experience what so many purported is the greatest game of all time, but other than that, I hadn't really experienced this series other than through osmosis in gaming culture. I loved how my small knowledge of the franchise informed the way I viewed the various legends in this game as someone who perhaps had only heard of them secondhand. I gleefully noticed, of course, any direct references to Ocarina, but everything else was either lost on me or made grander than life. The game had its hooks in me. The world was full of untold wonders, only a portion of which I experienced on my own journey to the credits. It, in a different way, felt like a perfect alternate world to escape into. GTA 5 hit a little too close to home for the current moment. Watching people mull about in a city feels nearly a bit forlorn. In Zelda, the world of the post-apocalypse feels like a more cathartic escape, seeing that it has already lived its great crisis, and living in the post-crisis somehow feels better than a world that is preparing to enter into one. Both Grand Theft Auto 5 and Zelda have allowed me to escape briefly into elaborate worlds, detailed beyond compare, and live out fantasies that would otherwise be impossible, especially considering the circumstances. They have broadened and set new bars for what is to be the scope of video games going forward. One speaks of a country full of corruption and contradiction, headed towards total depravity, and the other of a hero traveling far and wide, piecing together the aftermath of an apocalypse, and ultimately saving the world. But neither of these stories matter. What matters are the stories of the player, holding the controller into the dark hours of the night. Stories of tribulation, of joy, of horror, failure, and glorious success. Most importantly, however, stories of stupid fun and pure freedom. As we as a society prepare to face the great unknown in terms of untold catastrophe, a little taste of what excesses modern capitalism have afforded us are truly divine. These virtual experiences lived in the comfort of my chair are the great fruit of a system with untold productive capacity. What comes next I cannot begin to fathom.